Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for being able to be at this meeting today. I'm going to read the notice of non-discrimination first. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, included limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, industry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. I get the next page. Guidelines. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Erin McGuire via the chat box at emaguire@ctps.org or 857-702-3681. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA, Standards in Revised Section 508 Standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Erin McGuire, MPO staff at emaguire@ctps.org or 857-702-3681. Thank you. Erin, do you want to do the introductions?
Yes. Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, Chair of the MOU Committee.
Brian Kane.
Hi, Brian Kane, I'm here.
Let's see, Dennis Giambetti, who I heard in advance will not be at this meeting. Derek Cravat.
Hi everyone, Derek Cravat here from MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning.
Eric Barassa, who I also heard in advance will not be in attendance today. John Romano. I do not see him at the moment. Len Diggins.
Diggins, our tech chair here.
Jen Rowe.
Jen Rowe representing the city of Boston.
Thank you. And Mike Sandman.
Mike Sandman, Brookline Select Board.
Thank you. That's the role, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Are there any public comments? If there are none and there are comments after the committee members speak, you can raise your hand and we'll try to answer. Action item is summary of September 20th, 2023 meeting, and to vote to approve these minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
We have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Yeah.
Do you do a roll on this, Erin?
Has to be a roll. Bear with me. Tom Bent.
Yes.
Brian Kane.
Yes.
Derek Cravat.
Yes.
Len Diggins.
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe.
Yes.
And Mike Sandman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the summary of conversation with the Regional Transit Authorities, RTAs. Erin, do you want to take it from there?
Yes. So to jump straight into our conversation, on January 23rd, myself, Dave Hong, and Annette Demger met with staff from the Metro West Regional Transit Authority and Cape Ann Transportation Authority to discuss what their current relationship with the MPO and its staff is like, what their proposal for RTA representation on the board would look like, and we reviewed what board member responsibilities and expectations are. So to jump straight into what their proposal was, they suggested the creation of a Regional Transportation Authority seat on the board. This would function as a shared seat between the two RTAs. The RTAs would serve as the main representative on a rotational basis for a set period of time before the seat would then be switched to the other RTA. Each would serve as the other's alternate or designee, while the other is the main RTA seat. And we also have staff from MWRTA and CADA here to answer any questions you may have. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Erin, for putting that together and having them here. Is there any discussion on what the RTAs are proposing?
I have something, Tom.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks. So, Erin, how long would each RTA hold the seat for? Like a year?
That is something that would be determined by these committee deliberations. In our conversations, the RTAs were open to whatever proposals are made.
Okay, well, then I'll throw on the table that a year seems reasonable to me, especially now, given that we're having an annual general meeting every November that would give their administrator a chance to come and see and be seen. And so I think if we did a year commencing in November, when everybody else sort of retakes the seat, I think that would make sense. So, thanks.
And I think in talking to David, when he talked to them, I think the other RTA would be their alternate, and then they would switch the following year. If I believe that's correct, isn't it, Erin?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. Len.
Yeah, thanks. I like the idea, and especially if the alternate attends the meetings, as regularly, as the person that is occupying the seat and voting. My alternative to that, and I'm only half kidding, is that the alternate would attend RTAC meetings, but that's just to say that we really welcome the attendance or any participation by the RTAs at any and all of our meetings. So that's it. But overall, I think it's a good idea. Thanks.
Jen Rowe.
Yeah, just a question to clarify. Is this the conversation where we're coming to this decision, or is this just the opportunity for us to ask questions of the RTAs?
This is intended to be a starting point.
Yep. So it'd just be, starting to talk about it. We could let them into the meeting now, and have the opportunity to have them kind of run through it with us, and then any questions that we may have for them.
Just one last question, Tom.
Go ahead.
You just remind us the direction we got from the feds sort of mandated this, didn't it? So,
well, I don't know if it was
about?
a mandate. I think they just recommended we did it. Is that right, Jen? I think it was a recommendation, wasn't it?
Yes, it was a recommendation, and I believe the wording was that we come to a mutually agreeable decision.
Yeah, I think
it's probably a mandate. I'm sorry, Brian, what?
Then I think we should do this.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to also highlight that there were a series of different potential ways to provide representation on the board that I believe staff has presented at different times as well. And I'm curious if those other forums, like I know one example, like for example, there was the option of having the T more formally represent RTA interests on the board, or having the transit committee be officially the form of representation, like have them have a seat on the board. And so I'm curious if those options were also discussed, and if so, what was the feeling there?
David, I know you talked to them. Did you talk to them about those items?
This is Dave Hong. Mr. Chair, I would then defer to the members themselves to respond. And to answer your question directly, we did not discuss the full spectrum. I know that there has been a history as well of proposals and responses to those. So, Mr. Chair, at this point, I would defer to an official kind of response if you deem that appropriate.
Okay, well, why don't we, since we have them here, why don't we hear from them? Because I think from what I've seen and heard, that, you know, they want that representation themselves. So why don't we, since we have them here, why don't we go forward and have them do their presentation, and we'll ask any questions, and then we can go from there. All right, Jen, do you want to let them in?
I think they're in.
Mr. Chair, just to, sorry, Jen, there is Jim Nee and Tyler from the MWRTA, and then there's Felicia Webb from CATA as well. Tyler, pardon me, just as, is Tyler still in the room? Just wanted to mention Tyler Tarasi.
All right, so who would like to speak first from the RTAs?
Alicia, I'd be happy to go first unless you wanted to defer.
Nope, you can go ahead and go, Jen.
Awesome, thank you. So to the specific questions that were posed regarding the type of representation and the different options that were considered, I think some of the planning staff kind of hit the nail on the head, as did other members of the committee, that we're really looking for direct representation rather than represented by a committee or represented by another group. The RTAs, I think at this point, are less interested in making sure that we have one seat each, or, you know, some disproportionate weighted vote, and, you know, by creating, you know, too many seats. It's less about the percentage and the weighting, and it's more about making sure that the voices of the RTAs and those that we represent are directly represented rather than not. Much in the same way that we wouldn't want the T to be in a position to say, well, MassDOT represents them, or vice versa, or the city of Boston is represented by the T, or vice versa. The direct representation is what we're looking for, and we, like I said at the beginning, and like the staff said, we would be happy to share a seat on that rotating basis. And happy to answer any other questions. There's a number of things we talked to with the staff about at our previous meeting. Happy to answer sort of the big questions. The question of what we would like representation to look like, I think, has been sort of answered here, but we're obviously happy to continue that discussion. And the other two topics that really came up, it seems like over the last year or so, is will the RTAs be engaged with the MPO, and sort of why should the RTAs have a seat? And we're happy to answer any questions on those if you'd like.
Well, Jim, this is Tom. Yeah, that's a question that I have. So if you kind of want to kind of go into a little bit more detail, that'd be great.
Sure. So on the topic of sort of engagement with the MPO, there's obviously different levels that people engage with MPOs throughout the country and here in the Boston region. And there could be the natural inclination to think that, well, RTAs are only going to be concerned with tip items that have RTA stuff on them, and they're really, you know, not going to attend meetings, or some of these other topics don't really concern them. I can tell you that that couldn't be further from the truth. As I'm sure the staff can attest, RTA staff attendance at MPO meetings and subcommittee meetings are probably among the best of any attendees, though it's done so as a member of the public currently. And then the other topics, whether it's transportation equity, roads, bridges, bike shares, the MBTA, congestion mitigation, walkability, Vision Zero, how important safety is to us, the importance of intersection safety, and even including freight. I mean, right outside my window, we're probably likely to hear in the next few minutes, we have multiple at-grade freight rail crossings in Framingham that impact our operations as well. So there's really almost nothing that the MPO touches on that isn't a topic that's near and dear to the RTA's hearts, both CATA and Metro West. These things matter to us a great deal. And while we certainly are subject matter experts in certain fields, just like many of you probably have areas that you're more of a subject matter expert in than some of the others, all of these issues are of concern to us, and we really will be engaged on all these topics.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other members have any questions?
Yeah, I do want.
Go ahead, go ahead, and then Jen after you.
Len, I think you're muted at the
Yeah.
moment.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, I was having problems getting my hand up, and then I was having problems muting. Anyways, so how will you go about working with other RTAs, Jim and the representative from CADA? Because I imagine that you're not simply going to be looking out for the interests of MW, RTA, and CADA, right?
So in the context of the Boston MPO and having a board member seat on there, our interest would be primarily for our two RTAs as that seat holder, that sort of fiduciary responsibility and the sort of what we represent. But we're representing really the interest of the Boston MPO as a whole. There's a few other RTAs that have a few communities that cross into there, so there might be times where we could lend weight to a conversation. But our concern will be primarily with the Boston MPO, that region. It's less about sort of the 15 RTAs as a whole, or the MARTA, the statewide organization for RTAs. That's sort of a different scope. And we obviously, in our jobs every day, just like everyone else has multiple duties, we're concerned with those. But as a board member, a seat holder, we would be concerned with those two RTAs and any communities that have other RTAs as well as the MBTA communities, obviously.
All right, thank you.
Jen.
Oh, Brian can go first.
Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, now I feel the pressure, Jen.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Tom, I think we should just go ahead and do this. And I think it's a no-brainer. The feds have sort of insisted that we do it. Jim and the folks from CADA obviously have been attending, know what they're doing. My only question is sort of how we codify this in terms of the seat sharing and the swapping arrangement. That might be better served as a side agreement between them. But if it's kosher, I think we should just go with this and move to the next item. But that's just me. Sorry, Jen. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Thanks, Brian. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I guess I will be, a little contrary in that I think, and I'm not sure if this might be a next on the agenda, but at the last meeting I had requested kind of understanding a bit more of the kind of proportional representation of the board as it is now, because I'd say while I appreciate the benefits of having direct representation on the board, my concern is how the addition of other entities that represent, primarily Metro West and the North Shore onto the board kind of add an additional level of skewedness not misrepresentation. I don't know, I blanking on the back word, but that it does change the degree to which different individuals are represented proportionally on the MPO based on kind of demographics and population, and some research that's been conducted previously in terms of how that affects the racial representation as well. So that's, I think, my overarching concern, and I think we may be getting to that next. So,
well, Jen, you'll never yield to me again, huh?
Jen, that's a point that I have concern with that too. And I think the last time this issue came up, that was a point that the full board had brought forward. So we can discuss that after this. But Jim, I think you want to respond.
Yes, happy to chat about that. That's a great question. Honestly, if there was disproportionate weighting in one area or another, that could be a very large issue. There's a few notes that I would give on that. One of them is CADA and MWRTA do combine to provide a pretty small portion of what the MBTA does for sort of fixed route services, bus services, rail services. It's around 1% or less. It's quite a low number. So that's often one of the things that's looked to with the RTAs. Oh, they're such small organizations in comparison to the MBTA. Would this make sense to have them on there? But when you actually look at the ADA paratransit ridership of our regions, or what the regional transit authorities do in general, our two agencies combine to actually provide 15%, or another way to put that is the types of services that we're providing and the types of people we are serving are more than 15 times more likely to be, on average, members of the ADA and disabled communities. So the riderships that we represent are quite diverse. They're definitely representative of communities that are often underrepresented. And it's an area where we feel really strongly that the RTAs can bring sort of a perspective and a view that maybe needs to be represented better. I'm not saying it's not represented now. Additionally, when we talk about subregions versus RTA representation, they're not really the same thing. Just like the Boston representative wouldn't be someone who's supplanting the T representation. A subregional member, they represent the region, and they have a different sort of, again, I'll use the word fiduciary responsibility, or that they bring a different perspective to that seat than an RTA would. And because they have to worry about their region, whereas the RTAs are worrying about public transportation. So while there's some overlap there in the happenstance of where a subregion might be versus an RTA, the RTA representation and concerns, they're somewhat distinct from the subregional representation, just like a MassDOT or an MBTA or a Boston or an Intercore, that many of those things, they overlap in the Venn diagram of, things that people are concerned with, but they are distinctly different. And I think RTA is similar in that regard.
Right, does anyone else have any questions? Just to, for a second, Jim, to respond to that a little bit. I think one of the concerns is again, if, would this be almost like would the votes now be out of proportion, because this would almost be seen as an additional vote for the Metro West area, and I know, because you would be voting on more than just, say, RTA related issues. There's other issues that, like framing you might have, or somebody else. So I think that's part of the concern here. Does it start to, does the balance start to get out of balance a little bit?
Well, I can give you my word, and I know Felicia could speak to this as well, that the perspective we would bring is that of RTAs and not of the subregion. Obviously, the subregion members would bring that sub-regional perspective, but we care about safety. We care about good roads, good intersections, good public transit. We care about all the things that good stewards and good members of this Boston MPO board, they care about too. We're really in a similar camp. We just think we bring another perspective to the table that would be valuable and that would be somewhat unique, and that's how we feel about that. Felicia, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not right now, Jim. I'm good.
All right, thank you. Len, and then Jim.
Yeah. You see, I see the focus is more of that of transit. And so I think maybe the question we need to ask is whether we're going to disproportionately weight transit. And I guess my feelings are, I'm fine with erring on the side of that, but then, I bring a really strong bias, for transit, to the table. So I think you just have to discount my feelings for that. But then I think I can make a strong argument, for overweighting transit, given the importance, that it has, for things that we really value, primarily equity, and helping with the disparities that we do currently have, not only racially, but also, with people with low incomes. So that's how I see it. And to the extent that we can represent people, in these regions, that use transit, or are all for it, and also thinking ahead, where we may see people moving out further from the core, because that's where they can afford to live, then trying to provide effective transit for them, is a good thing. And to the extent that RTAs can help with that, that's great. And to the extent they would be, a resource on the board that brings that expertise, I think would also be good. So if the feds weren't asking us to do it, I'd be suggesting that we do it. I certainly understand the arguments that Jen, and others have made. I think, actually, can't remember the person who used to work for the MBTA, for the CPS, Liz Moore. I think she did some research, about the makeup of the boards. But then if we're going to discuss that, I think that's a whole bigger discussion, for the whole MPO as it's currently constituted. And so I welcome that. But in the meantime, I am supportive of bringing them, the RTs on. Sorry for that long spiel, but I'm done now. Thanks.
Thanks, Len. Jen.
Right, I'm gonna throw a bit of a curveball here, but I would, yeah, I appreciate the kind of value of having direct RTA representation on the board. One thing maybe we could consider is whether, like, I'm a member of a union. We have a voting body that decides our healthcare, and each union has votes proportional to the number of members in that union. So everyone has a direct seat at the table, but when votes are counted, the vote is proportional to the number there. So I wonder if that is something we might consider doing, both for the in terms of, like, the transit representation on our board, and also the municipal representation on our board. I know that it's a larger question, but wanted to throw that out there as expanding the pie type of option.
Thank you, Jen. It's funny because I know, I'm not sure if it was you or it came up about the Salem State study that I think we're going to discuss later on a bit. But I went through that, and it talks about the inner core basically not having. It gets very complicated, but not having the the right balance as far as representation with the outer areas. So that's, and that was interesting. That was been done back in 2015. It's probably changed a little bit since then, but we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about that also. If there's no other questions, I think what we'll do is, where we do have this set up to continue discussion either today or at next meeting. So I think we can kind of go from there now, unless anybody has any other thing that they would want to bring up. Not seeing any. Okay, thank you. I want to thank the members of the RTAs for coming before us today. We appreciate it. All right. Let's see. Jen, do you want to, let's see, the next item would be follow-up items, and I guess that would go to Abigail.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Abby. I presented a few weeks ago, but I don't know if everybody was there. So if I haven't met you virtually yet, I'm the new-ish, it's been about 3.5 months, transportation policy analyst for the MPO. And really what I'm going to be talking about is just a few follow-up items that we had from committee members' questions from the previous committee meeting. Dave, if you could go to the next slide. I'm on the wrong slide. There we go. Okay. So essentially, the feedback and the questions that we got during the last meeting shaped the 4 questions on this slide that we used to guide our research for the past couple of weeks. These questions are: 1, what is an MOU? 2, how do MPOs work to advance regional objectives? 3, how do RTAs work with MPO boards elsewhere? And 4, how can regional populations shape board representation? And next slide. So for the first one, what is an MOU? We kind of just wanted to go with 3 adjectives, words to describe it. It's collaborative. So as we know, MOUs are intended to be developed collaboratively and support the needs and strengths of all the parties involved. MOUs are non-binding. They're not contractual documents and do not account for legal obligations that the parties involved may have to one another. And lastly, that they're periodically evolving. MOU development is sort of a semi-ongoing process. While the goal is to have a document that has the durability and longevity to last years, an MOU is also intended to be periodically reviewed and updated, and many MOUs contain guidelines for how often this will happen, every 4 years, every 6 years, etc. And the development process itself is an opportunity for reflection, negotiation, and elaboration from all the parties involved. Next slide. Thank you. We also kind of wanted to talk about a question that came up was how do MPOs drive change in the region through like policy, through research, etc. And although MPOs generally don't have many discrete levers, so to speak, to drive regional planning goals, their research agendas in the UPWP, the long range vision planning in the LRTP, and the 5-year capital planning process in the TIP allow them to influence policy change in the region. Additionally, through their research, they can highlight particular issue areas and in this way bring attention to them. In other words, like we can't change what we don't measure. For a few examples of this across the country, in Connecticut, MPOs are developing strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 5% by 2030. In Oregon, MPOs report on VMT annually in their regions, and Portland's MPO maintains a high injury network data set. It's important to note that it's not just Portland that does the high injury network data set. That's a standard feature in all Vision Zero action plans, which focus on reducing roadway fatalities to 0. So that's not just them, but that's sort of where it fit the best on the slide. And lastly, that MPOs in California create sustainable community strategies to integrate land use and housing with transportation to move towards their regional goals. It's also important to note that all 3 of these are state directed, so MPOs are required to do this by the state. The governor of Connecticut said that we have to reduce VMT by 5% by 2030. MPOs, it's your job to figure out how we're going to do that. However, it's still their research and they are the ones driving the conversation. And that's important to note for how we can also drive the conversation, which leads into the next slide. Our current MPO actions and how our existing policy mechanisms drive regional priorities. So there are currently 4 primary ways that the Boston region MPO has established policy mechanisms to influence priorities across the region. First, the long-range transportation plan's vision, goals, objectives, development process is an opportunity to add priorities for the region, explore existing needs, and examine areas for improvement. These goals are then translated into the 5-year TIP through the project selection criteria, and this criteria is used to assign a numerical score to potential projects to be funded with MPO dollars and is designed to quantify a project's alignment with the MPO priorities. Similarly, the MPO has implemented its disparate impact and disproportionate burden policy in an attempt to identify and mitigate any disparate impacts of transportation investments. Specifically within the LRTP, the DIDB policy is used to analyze LRTP projects that change the capacity of the transportation network. So, for example, adding or removing a roadway lane or building a new subway line, and use state or federal funding. And because the MPO staff do these assessments, the MPO board members can ensure that they select projects that do not adversely affect low income and minority populations. Lastly, a relatively new initiative from the MPO is the development of a regional Vision Zero action plan, which is set to be completed in mid-2025. And common features of these Vision Zero plans include high injury networks, as I mentioned with Portland, that quantify and plot the most dangerous traffic areas or intersections or conflicts between pedestrians and cars, etc., throughout a region, whether that region is a city, a region like ours, or a state. And these plans also identify a variety of strategies and potential projects for the region to address these vulnerable road user fatalities. And in this way, the MPO has the potential to shape safety policy region-wide. So really, all of this is to say that the question for this committee then, for committee members to consider, is what extent should these mechanisms be explicitly written into the MOU versus the operation plan or other strategic initiatives? Next slide. No. Okay, it's on the next slide. Great. And so in the last meeting, the committee had questions about the implementation of RTA board representation in specific cases. So I had asked AMPO for recommendations on which MPOs to reach out to discuss how RTA representation came to be, how it has shaped the MPO, things like that. They had suggested Baltimore and Portland, Maine, and I was able to speak with Baltimore last week. So how Baltimore came to be with their RTA representation is that after the FTA put out its guidance in 2014, that transit operators are required to be represented in some way. The Baltimore MPO added Baltimore's primary transit operator, so the analog to the MBTA, and a second RTA seat via an adopted resolution later that year. The RTA seat is a 2-year term that's elected by the 7 RTAs that the seat represents. So it's 1 seat for the 7 RTAs, and it's chosen from among the 7 RTAs every 2 years. And in terms of how the board representation has shaped coordination, the person that I was speaking to, who is, I believe, the executive director of the MPO, his name was Todd, he was very nice, but has led to a lot of information sharing, has been like the primary benefit that they've seen, particularly with regards to like transit asset management. It's been helpful for them to be able to get like a much closer and like more transparent look at the state of good repair of the equipment and buses and things that the RTAs are utilizing, especially where the seat represents 7 RTAs. Before, that type of coordination would be very difficult. And now the one board member that represents those 7 RTAs, it's like they're sort of a liaison, which they said has been very helpful. It's also led to increased coordinations between the RTAs themselves. So, for example, after this resolution was passed and the 7 RTAs started voting to have one representative, they also began having their own separate annual conference, which is where like they would vote to have the representative. And then it sort of became like a separate event as well, where they would do a lot of like information sharing and networking and all of that. So not only has it like increased the RTA's influence on the boards, it's also influenced the RTA's coordination with each other. And lastly, one of the biggest benefits that they've seen is that there's a much more integrated planning process. Having smaller providers' perspectives and the unique challenges that come with operating smaller transit systems has been helpful, particularly with ADA paratransit services, as we've already discussed. They also emphasize that while, of course, RTA representation does affect the MPO also affects having representation on the MPO board also affects the RTAs themselves. Because of the closer working relationship, the MPO has been able to work more closely with the RTAs in their transit development plans and things like that. So that is the Baltimore case. And then last slide before we open it up for a discussion is something that we've kind of already alluded to. So in the last meeting, the committee had asked if there were any examples of how relative population affects relative representation on the board. And a study released in 2015 by a Salem State University professor investigated the same question for the Boston region, and the visual results of the study are on the slide. It's important to note that the study does have a bit limited applicability to today, given that it's approaching a decade old. It doesn't account for MBTA representation. And finally, the study uses 2010 census numbers, and an updated 2020 census may show slightly different, very different results. We're not sure. Generally speaking, however, he found an inverse relationship between population and representation on the board, with the inner core being underrepresented relative to the population distribution. And what we can gather from this is that the board representation does not always follow population distribution or vice versa. However, one of the final notes is that in his study, he also really emphasized how having more transit representation can sort of skew like the conversations from highway funding to transit funding and vice versa, and the importance of representation in that way. So that's also really important to note. And I'm actually going to call on Erin to supplement this slide because I know that she has read this study a lot. She's the one who found the study. She's very interested in it. And I know that she had a particular finding that I'm blanking on the specifics of that related for highway and transit funding. Yes, so I will just say that Marcus Luna, who wrote this study, had noted that as suburban representation increases on an MPO board, it's typically found that investments tend to go more towards highway investments. So it's an interesting note that while these RTAs that we're discussing are located in a suburban area of the region, it adds some interesting nuance to this conversation in that they are transit providers. And that was one of the key challenges that was illuminated in the study. Yeah, exactly. So kind of going back and forth between the idea that while it is representation, more changing the representation from like the inner core out towards municipalities, it's also that the extra representation is from a transportation provider, that it may not necessarily follow the curve that he found in his study about suburban representation and highway funding. And so that's the end of the follow-up slides from the last meeting. I'm sure that there.
We have some, yep, we have a question, Brian.
Thanks, Tom. Abby, great job as always. Thank you. So maybe just two quick follow-up requests, sort of building on this. And I speak as someone who also, my board has a weighted vote. And we have to be very careful because Boston is growing so much faster relative to the rest of the Commonwealth and the rest of the region that we very quickly are running the risk of having Boston sort of have over 50% of the vote, which means if we were to theoretically implement this on the MPO, we might just, at that point, just say, let's just have David and Jen just figure it all out and we'll just stay home, and it'll just be much easier that way because they'll have 100% of the votes. And so I wonder if you could do some population analysis for me, Abby, and just sort of see what the total population of the 99 communities is from the 2020 census. And then just sort of what Boston is and what percentage that would be. And I have a feeling it's about 52%. Because no, Jen's shaking her head. I believe them, so I'm probably wrong. Wouldn't be the first time. And then I guess the other question would be in terms of dollars spent in recent years, I'm just curious, sort of, is the Salem state analysis playing out in reality? Because it doesn't seem to me like that's happening here. I just sort of get the sense that we do several sort of smaller projects in a bunch of places, and Boston, because it has such a large population, gets more projects, especially larger projects like Rutherford. And if we want to count GLX, I mean, we could do that. I don't know, that's more of a Somerville Cambridge project, but it certainly had Boston effect. So anyway, I thank you for the research. I think the Salem State professor would be proven incorrect today. My gut tells me that. And I think that while I love our capital city, they've just done such a good job in the last few years of growing that there is a risk of being completely subsumed by them. And that is a concern because they're so great.
Jen, your hand was up, but then it went down. Do you want to respond?
Sure, yeah. I don't know the exact answer to Brian's question. I will say in the prior analysis, Boston's proportional share was actually, given our 2 seats that we currently have, wasn't actually that far off. In fact, it was, yeah, one very close to kind of what we should have had. Of course, assumptions and limitations that were previously well described by staff. So yeah, I mean, of course, I think our population has grown. We have done a very good job of adding housing, although we still have work to do. But yeah, I think I do think I broadly support the initiative to actually take a look at this analysis and on both sides of it, the kind of where population and representation lands us now, what that would look like, and also and I do think staff has done some work to like show the allocation of projects and dollars to the best it's able, because of course these things are a little messy with most projects serving multiple communities in hard to quantify ways, but I think that side of it is also interesting. And I also am hopeful that and believe, I don't think we're as skewed as the study would suggest, but I do think it's worth our while to kind of do our due diligence.
And just on that, obviously Boston has grown, but, a lot of the inner core cities have also, Somerville quite a bit, especially with the work that Somerville's done. We were the first to go to 20% on the affordable housing percentages. And with a lot of the other work that we've done around the new, Green Line stops, we're encouraging housing, transit housing, basically putting in developments that have no opportunity for parking, and they will not get parking permits either. So it's more than Boston, and but it is spreading out, into the inner core, and mainly because of the demand and need for housing and where the jobs are. Len.
Yeah, and so this is a really interesting discussion. Obviously, I think parts of it, I'd like to see more members of the MPO board participate, and because we're here, by virtue of talking about the RTAs, and so I think if we were limiting it simply to whether or not we bring in the RTAs, it would be fine. But now that we're talking about how the board is constituted, that's a whole nother discussion. Like I said, I'm fine with having it here, but certainly, I think we should be prepared to have more of a discussion with the rest of our colleagues on the board. And I'll simply say, with respect to the suburbs, first off, the Boston MPO is getting a disproportionate amount of the overall funding available to MPOs, and also I think we need to keep in mind, at least currently, I think a lot of people are still traveling between the suburbs, and Boston, for work. And so I think we need to, well, not I think, I feel we need to take into account the benefits that come from, and if they are distributed, more towards the suburbs than we might, ordinarily expect given the population weighting. And I think that's all part that goes into our criteria, and how we assess projects, when we or how we choose projects based on criteria. That's it. Thanks.
Tegan.
Yeah, sorry, I have a clarification question. Actually, Jen is actually asking it to you. You said something, maybe I misheard you, but about just Boston MPO as a whole getting a disproportionate amount of funding compared to the rest. And can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I used the wrong word. It's not disproportionate. It's just it is proportionate with respect to the population, right? That's how.
Oh, okay. So the trick with that, I just want to kind of the elephant in the room when we talk about the proportionate distribution of funds in Massachusetts, is that the percentage of the target funds that are assigned to the Boston Region MPO for distribution is based on what is called the MARPA formula, which I have never seen I've never seen the actual formula. And so we're still using a percentage number from back, I don't know how long ago. So the 42 point something % that is attributed to the MPO was based on something that was proportionate of a formula that was applied a long time ago.
Okay.
So that's something that it's like the elephant in the room, because revisiting it takes the whole statewide MARPA like engagement to do. But we get more dollars than the rest by far.
Right.
But it's not clear whether it is truly based on current data, or even what it's based on, whether it's population, roadway miles, which percentage of which. So it's tricky, but I didn't mean to take us off on a tangent. I just thought that was it's an interesting dilemma that we have as an MPO to think about. But if we were to revisit that number, it is redistributing from some other MPOs to this MPO when this MPO already receives the lion's share, I think, to your point, of the funding, because of even then the formula yielded that result.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I was really sloppy with my language there, so I appreciate being called out on it. So thanks, and then all the clarification that came along with it. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Glenn.
Brian.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, thank you, Tegan, for the explanation. I was going to ask a similar question in a similar vein, and I do think, for the record, we should redo the MARPA formula, especially if we don't have the formula. It's like Coke and Pepsi trying to fight, and no one knows how to make the damn stuff. Yeah, let's do that again. And because Boston the Boston region, this MPO region, hosts a vastly disproportionate percentage of the state's infrastructure, we need that money to come here, especially for things like MBTA facilities that go outside of the Boston region MPO. But I'll get off my high horse now and ask my question. I'm a little nervous about where this debate or discussion might be going. And Abby, maybe this is a research question for you, because I think we've done a pretty good job on the board of not sort of getting into regionalism and factionalism. We've done a good job of sort of not being like, oh no, that part of the region has had too much, so we have to do something over here. It really, in my experience, it tends to be more sort of where the need is. There is obviously a need for geographic diversity and for geographic spread, and I do know we take that into account. I certainly try to, and I know we try to on committees and stuff, but I just want to make sure that we don't kind of go down a rabbit hole of solving a problem that we might not have. And so I guess, Abby, the question from a research perspective would be like, is there any way to figure out how many votes the MPO board has taken on spending items in the last couple of years? How many of those have not been unanimous? Because the way I see it, every single vote's unanimous, which that tells me we're all kind of in harmony here. I mean, unless you could argue that the discussions take place beforehand, but we would never violate open meeting law like that. So I just think we just have to be careful kind of what we're discussing or where we're trying to go. That's all.
Yeah, and sorry, just to quickly respond. So that's something that, although I worked for the Boston MPO, I am now more intimately familiar with the Baltimore MPO's most recent votes. And when I had asked him about like sort of different weights of representation and how they had handled that, he was genuinely like a little confused. He was like, we just didn't really talk about it. Like the vote was unanimous. Like it didn't really come up. So I do think, yeah, like, while it's easy and important to sort of get into the weeds and like really break down like who's getting what and equity and geographic diversity, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the day, like you said, it's the whole region, and we so far have seemed, at least from my perspective, have seemed to do a good job in focusing on where the need is rather than like fighting over who gets the sandbox.
Hey, Dave.
I'll yield to Tegan first, if that's all right.
Good. Sorry about that. I wanted to kind of appreciate, everybody's comments, and also just add a little perspective from just having to think a lot about the structure of this MPO relative to other MPOs, which is that, and also kind of in the context of equity and equity considerations, people still a lot of times use the word equity to talk about, equal or direct proportion or things like that. But it's actually a much more, I'd say it's a much more nuanced and complex concept than that, including when you're talking about governance and representation. just because every vote is unanimous now doesn't mean that it would be unanimous with a different structure around it, right? It could be the structures influencing how the voting actually occurs. And while I'm not saying that I think that Brian's point is invalid, in fact, I think it's a very valid point. I just do want to point out that there is an interaction between these elements, like how a board is structured, how the conversation happens, who the people actually sitting in the seats are. And so it's something that is nuanced enough that I don't think we should draw like the direct correlation, but sort of where you feel comfortable exploring representation, I think it's important to just have those conversations. And if you think that it's not worth it, because it is very complicated to have the sort of weighted voting, and many MPOs do have weighted voting, but it is complicated. It is a very challenging topic to handle and to try to process. So just to put that out there in terms of perspective and what I've been hearing from some of my experience with their MPOs.
Thanks, Sagan. J.R. Frey.
I just wanted to chime in on 2 points. First, I'll take the MPO point in that I would, rather than quite the way Brian characterized it, I would say that the MPO does a great job of relying on our professional staff to inform and support us. And the MPO takes its cues from the conversations that are had in these meetings and uses that information to then make proposals that are unanimously supported. And then the other thing that I would say, that I wanted to say, representing Hingham, in that we have actually 3 different modes of transit that support the residents of Hingham and our neighboring communities. And sometimes, I just wanted to point out that sometimes those highway dollars, well, most of the time we're thinking of the rail side of it, but sometimes those highway dollars can indeed support transit in the sense of making sure that we have accessible bus stops incorporated into our programs, as well as access to the ferry. So just throwing that out there and adding that in.
Thank you. Let's see. Any other questions? Okay, Len, I saw you for a second. Your hand was up.
Yeah, I mean, I could say a lot more, but we have a lot more on the agenda. I mean, and this is a very interesting discussion. I mean, and I hope we do continue it. Just want to say to John Romano, I kind of feel an ad hoc committee coming on. Are you ready, John? Anyways.
Thanks, Glenn. Dave.
Brian, thank you for the question earlier, or questions. The second question that you had wanted to be crisp so that we could explore. So you said, by dollars spent, is Salem State study playing out in reality? How much money is being spent by region? And so wanted to see if that would, as an action, translate in looking at tip dollars spent on average the last 3 years by subregion, or if you were curious about something broader than that, looking at a sub-regional kind of distribution.
For me, sub-regional's fine. Don't kill yourselves.
Okay, Roger. Thank you.
Just to add to that is something that we have looked at, I think, year over year in terms of analysis of spending in the region. So that might be something that it's a little bit of a low-hanging fruit to bring back to the forefront. So Dave, thanks for getting that clarification. We can talk about that. That's great.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I'm going to move on to, I believe it's number 7, work planning. Dave?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Aaron, who will walk us through if there have been any feedback. We had shared this document that is work in progress.
I'm sorry, I jumped to one. Yeah, it's the MOU document discussion. Sorry about that.
No worries. So on this exact topic, the draft document was shared through, and if there had been comments, we will look at those together. If not, we will still open up the sections that have been marked up by staff, and also kind of explain which ad hoc committee recommendations we are responding to. With that, I will pass it on to Erin. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the key topics that are covered in these proposed updates include updated voting rules, updated paragraphs on what demographic and geographic equity looks like at the MPO. We have highlighted a few areas that we think would be better suited in the operations plan, have also proposed a new review cycle and some editorial revisions throughout just to make the document read better, have a bit more flow. And I also did get responses by email. So some of those adjustments will also be reflected in this document. But I see Brian's hand.
I know you're shocked to see me raise my hand. Tom, a question for you related to this, and I'm not sure where to ask this. And it's in addition to the RTAs, I wanted to see if we could discuss bringing DCR to the table.
All right, I'm going to ask you why. Why would you want to bring them in?
Because they run incredibly important regionally significant road networks in a bad way. And they need to come here and be told how bad they're doing it to give their roads to MassDOT so we can do stuff with them. And so we can program money to fix them because they're so terrible.
Okay. I'm not sure where to go with this. You see, John Romano got his hand up, though.
So thank you, Tom. First of all, I think we should limit Brian to only 6 questions a session.
Yeah.
We should take a vote on that.
Statements. There aren't questions, they're statements.
Same, either one.
I ask the questions.
Throwing the bomb, you know.
I think that we're starting to get off topic with what we're actually here for. And I'm not sure that, bringing in other agencies is part of what we're supposed to be looking at. And maybe that needs to get thrown back to the big, to the big group first. And if they want us to add that on to our mission, we can, but I don't think we should be doing that. I mean, we probably could think of more things like that. But the committee will never end. It'll be the never ending committee instead of the MOU committee. So that's just my take.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Tegan, do you have any thoughts on this?
To be perfectly transparent, I just took a quick restroom break, and so I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry, I was drinking tea.
I threw a hand grenade
for like 2 minutes.
Brian threw a hand grenade. He wants to bring DCR into the mix, and he wants us to bring him in just so we can tell them what they're doing wrong, basically.
I want
right,
to discuss it.
You mean onto the board?
And I want to fix the roads because they're so bad.
And John Romano's basically thinking it's getting beyond our purview here. And this would probably be another question to go back to the board or to David, and because again, how far do we go with the MOU?
Well, full disclosure that I didn't catch all of that conversation or exactly what was being asked. One of the things I will say is that DCR is one of agencies that regardless we should be coordinating with, right, in terms of trying to implement these projects, because they're often a key stakeholder in an MPO funded project. So regardless of sort of like representation or seats on boards or things like that, I do think that collaboration and coordination is a very important part of what we do. And so we don't not talk to DCR, but it's an agency that's had its own kind of capacity struggles and things like that. And so we've been working to sort of improve that collaboration. Is that completely tangential to what you're talking about?
No. All right, Len.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, I was having a hard time making comments on this because I was really kind of waiting until to see how we define what an MOU is. I see it as an agreement, amongst the members of the entity, and between that entity and those to whom that entity reports. And so there's that, and so I kind of want to think about how, what kind of agreement we're going to have with, the people to whom we report, the public primarily. That was one of the reasons I was thinking too, that we should get input, from representatives of the MPO, in the subregions, and also representatives from other entities in those subregions to get a sense of what it is that they expect from us and what they want from us. So there's that. Another part was that I was kind of getting hung up on the notion of bylaws. So a question is, do you know if other MPOs have bylaws? Like the advisory council has bylaws, because some of the things here, they don't exactly fit into an operations plan, but they would be more, like bylaws, like the voting issues. Those are like things that we're saying that we're going to do. And we have to do them. And you can say that's part of the operations plan, but I could also see that as being bylaws. But I don't want to like throw a wrench into this. If we want to keep it in the MOU, but fine. It's just not the sort of thing that I would put in an MOU. So anyways, I'm about to start rambling, so I'm gonna stop. Yeah.
Does anyone from staff art want to respond to what Lynn just said?
The question about bylaws,
Yep.
MPOs. Are you aware other MPOs having bylaws?
So I think I would like my staff to correct me if you think that I am wrong from the research you've been doing. I think that the operations plan is sort of a substitute for bylaws at this point. So up until you approved the operations plan, no, I don't think we had bylaws.
Yeah.
And we probably are not the only MPO that didn't have them. So I think this is why, it's tedious and detailed, but the operations plan is such an essential aspect of maintaining kind of consistent operations of the MPO and laying out expectations, that I would say probably serves that purpose. I think my staff are nodding with me, but please yell out if not.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions with what we've been talking about on the MOU or anything else? All right. I'm gonna go to item number 7 now, work planning. David?
Yes, certainly can go to work planning. Just mindful of looking at the time here. Aaron, was the vision to go into the document itself, or
Oh, I'm sorry.
or not? No, that's okay, Tom. Yeah, just wanted to see, Aaron, what was the proposed plan?
Yeah, I was thinking we could take the time to go through at least the updated voting rules, some very basic revisions here just to get some initial thoughts. But this will definitely be an ongoing process. It's not going to be the last time you have the opportunity to comment on this. So I'm open to anyone else's suggestions, but that was my plan.
Yeah, Aaron, why don't we go through, because, these are ones that we talked about the other day, but why don't you go through them, because a lot of them were, pretty minor, and then other ones that were just referring to go into the operations plan, that type of thing. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to read it and take a look at the comments that you had in there, but go ahead.
All right, awesome. So we are just going to get started at the introduction. First, I just want to note that looking at the 3C process, these objectives have not changed, but we do want to go back into this section and give it some editorial revisions. So that has not been addressed yet, and it will in the future. And that, the first major change is very minor. It's in section C, municipal membership, and it is updating the reference to the MBTA advisory board, from advisory board to the MBTA to MBTA advisory board. Just want to stop any hesitations here. Perfect. Again, because the advisory council is a larger revision, we're going to return to this section later on. So the next change that we're looking at is updating our voting rules. The first part of this is specifying exactly what counts as a certification document and would require a 2/3 vote threshold. So for that, we are proposing that this is all certification documents, which is outlined in the operations plan, including their amendments and adjustments. And then beyond that, any other vote would be by simple majority and would just require a quorum of members. And I'll pause here.
Any questions on this section? Not seeing any.
Perfect. Jen had submitted some comments about revising the order of this section. And again, I believe we're going to be going back into this, so I'm just going to skip by it for the moment. This next section is a little bit much to look at, but what we're getting at is the proposal for updating the paragraph about geographic and demographic equity. I would say before we go through these revisions, I want to know if anyone has any comments on this area.
Yeah, I'm trying to find my hand. My reactions thing keeps changing where it is. I mean, on the bottom. That's what's going on. So, hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
Okay, thanks.
I'm
So
sorry.
no problem. I didn't know who to wait for. So my concern about the geographic, element, and other disparities is that to me begins to feel a lot like criteria, and so it kind of brings us back to the conversation that we had last time, where me and Brian was wanting to put climate change in, and now it's going, well, that's criteria. Those are things that we look at when we are assessing projects, for the tip. So I kind of feel the same way about the geographic, and the other inequities that are addressed here. So I'm wondering, can we make a case for why that is different, than other criteria, in order to rationalize having them here and not others?
Okay, Jen.
I just wanted to note that I think in other places, there are a lot of other considerations that are noted, like there's a lot of places where it says it should be balanced and multimodal and a bunch of other things that I'm not going to summarize here. So I do think that there are other considerations noted, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea to confirm that overall the descriptive words we're using are aligned with what we're kind of have decided to prioritize as a region.
Okay. Well, it's more of a rhetorical question, I guess, for us to consider. I mean, I'm not making a strong case one way or another at this point, but also given that what we just discussed too about kind of weightings on the board, and the possible influence that it has on the distribution of projects. It's just something to take into consideration when we start putting this language into the MOU, as opposed to leaving all that stuff for the criteria that we use to select projects.
Tegan.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for recognizing that and calling that out. I don't know that we have an exact case right now as to why this and not, climate change, given that this was in the document and already, and so we're revising it to make it make sense. I mean, equity is core to what the NPO does from the start of when NPOs were established, but arguably many of these things are. So I just want to reply back and say we will continue to work with you and think about this throughout the document to try to make sure that what we're ending up proposing is consistent with what you all think should be in the MOU, and not that we're cherry picking one or the other without sort of a reason for it. And that makes total sense. So I appreciate you bringing it up.
Annette.
Thank you. I do think part of the reason why these two ended up in the MOU is because they're related to our federal requirements. They are specified in our requirements, so that's probably why they're in here as opposed to some of the others.
Oh, thank you. Brian.
where do the 99 cities and towns in this district come from? Like, who picked 99 and how are they selected?
It's 97 now.
Whatever
Used
the
to be
hell it is.
101.
Well, but
Yeah.
who picks them and how? Because I'm scrolling through chapter 40 over here, and it says nothing that I can. I don't see any basis for any of this.
Annette, do you have comments on that?
Because it's the way it was in 1973. Okay.
Annette.
No, sorry, my hand raised button is behind my laptop screen, so takes me a minute. Again, that's defined in the federal regulations of how MPOs are defined. So it's based on the urbanized area definition and then the metropolitan area.
But then we had several municipalities, correct, that opted to detach from our MPO and attach to another. So it is possible to make adjustments from there, but the basis for the area is based on the requirements and the guidance that Annette referenced.
Right, and they were able to leave because they are in 2 MPO regions.
Thank you.
All right, Erin, do you want to continue?
Yes. So the next big round of revisions that we are proposing is moving large chunks of the Transportation Improvement Program, Section 4, into the operations plan. So the first section that we propose to move into the operations plan would be these paragraphs within subsection B, which is discussing fiscal constraint and tip development and just a lot of specifics. So I'll pause if anyone has any qualms with that.
Len.
Get it out into the operations plan. Yes.
I agree, Len.
Perfect.
All right.
Similar vein, we have another large section that we propose moving to the operations plan. That is going to be in E, the highway, bridge, bicycle, and pedestrian programs, moving these segments into 8.2 of the operations plan. And then in addition to that, section F, which is the improvement of tip-related information, which would move in its entirety to the operations plan. So again, I will just pause here.
Anybody have any comments on this section?
Totally fine with that. Especially if they borrow a lot of money.
All right. And then the last major revision that we're going to be discussing today is the review cycle of this document. So we are proposing a cycle that would align with the federal certification review. So every 4 years, the board would reevaluate the MOU and discuss if it would need to be updated any further. So I'm definitely interested in hearing opinions on this aspect of it.
Len.
Yes, definitely every 4 years. And I think it'd be good too if it didn't line up. With the LRTP. So the feds may come in and do their thing. And give us a report out. And maybe that report out comes while we're in the midst of the LRTP. But then we would deal with it pretty much on this time frame, like the year after we finish the LRTP. Because that's just always such a busy year. So that's it. Thank you.
John Romano.
Oh, sorry. So the intent will be after we get any comments or changes from the federal certification, then we would do it if necessary, right?
Yes, correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else on that? Nope. Okay, Erin.
All right. I think that
was pretty much it, right?
brings us to a close for this part. So I will yield to David. Or I do see Steve Olenoff raising his hand.
Oh, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, could you go back to that paragraph about holding in-person meetings?
Yes.
Yeah,
Right,
right
right
there at
here.
the bottom, right. So that's really an all or nothing kind of proposition there. So if you hold one not in person meeting, one virtual meeting a year, then you don't have to hold any regional meetings at all. And we're really, I mean, I think we should strive to say, okay, you should do a certain percentage of all in-person meetings should be held somewhere else in the region. I think we're really getting away from holding in-person meetings, and we're completely killing any prospect of getting a regional meeting, and we then need to keep that alive.
Yeah, Steve, that's, it's a good point. Because I think even when we were doing the meetings outside of Boston, when all our meetings were in person, I think, I'm not sure if we were able to get 4 meetings a year in different locations every year.
Yeah,
Len,
it
go ahead.
says strive. So
Yeah,
that
right.
word kind of, that's what you're just striving anyway.
Gives you an out.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Len.
Well, I guess the question is, should that word be in person or should it be hybrid?
That's another good point. Yeah. Now, like, I'm gonna just go back to Steve on that for a minute. Do you think a hybrid meeting still kind of meets the issue?
Well, if we have hybrid meetings, we still want to have in-person meetings. And if we have in-person meetings, it's really the other way around. If all our meetings were hybrid, then obviously you wouldn't. But if some of our meetings are hybrid and some are in person, then some of those should be regional.
Well, I think, Steve, though, I think you can still have a hybrid meeting that is located in some place other than in Boston. So I'm really saying that, we can have the meetings in different locations, but I would like to think that all those meetings would be hybrid. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, hybrid's okay.
Yeah, the only issue I know is some I know even in Somerville, trying to get back to full in-person meetings, but also a combination of in-person and hybrid, has been somewhat of a technological challenge, and they're working on it, but it's a cost issue, and it's also, where do you hold these meetings type issue? It's a meeting space, so it gets a little complicated. So it's just something that we should think about. Brian, and then Tegan.
I'm just curious, did we decide that this should be here and not in the operations plan? And I think it should be in the operations plan.
Actually, Erin, was that what you're proposing, to move this into the operations plan?
Not explicitly, but
Okay.
that's definitely something we can do.
Okay. Tegan?
Yeah, thanks. I want to acknowledge what Steve is, I think, asking for is based on the concept of being able to engage other parts of the region in ways that are supportive of those that aren't in the inner core, because it is hard for them to travel to the in-person meetings. So I definitely recognize that. And Steve, if I've misunderstood your intent, feel free to let me know. I also then want to build on what Tom said, which is that it's not that I'm against that, not at all. I think that it's a serious consideration for this board to consider the level of effort. Every meeting we now do hybrid is a significant level of effort, above and beyond what we do for the virtual meetings at this point. And that's okay. When we know the room and we know the system and we can kind of pivot into that easily, it's less effort than if we're in a new location and we don't know the system. And it's a lot of legwork that staff have to do to make that look seamless. There's a lot of running around that does happen, and a lot of cost and expense to the MPO in terms of staff time to do that. So I'm not at all against it. I just want to be honest about, I think, the level of effort, that it does take a significant level of effort to be in a different location for the staff that you are funding through the PL funds. So again, not against it, but just hope you'll let us kind of think about that a little bit more and talk about the implications for staff in that regard.
Thank you, Tegan. Anybody else on anything on the MOU updates? Len?
I want to make a case for keeping this actually in the MOU, like how and where we meet, because I think that is being in agreement, understanding with the members, of the board, and with the public, and so that's just an argument, not a strong one, but an argument nonetheless. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna move on to, because we're up against it now. Number 7, finally, work planning, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. I can run through this fairly swiftly, given our time. So I think slide 20, this is tentative as a preview, and I think we have shifted gears a little bit. So on February the 15th, initially I had to hear a proposed approach for committee to engage with the RTAs. I think that Tom, believe we are potentially continuing this conversation into the next committee meeting, if I'm not wrong. And so that would be marked for the 21st. I believe the document updates, there were some comments, but to a large extent, those are small revisions, and we can have another quick peek, but not an extensive discussion. I'm going to pause there, Tom, just see your reactions on the first topic that we discussed on the RTAs, how the next couple of weeks look like.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's move it as you suggested, and we'll hopefully, be able to go forward after that. And then I think my intention on the RTA issue would be, and I've talked to staff about this, is to bring it to once we've decided on what we're going to do, is to bring that to the full board earlier than later. I don't want to wait until November. When we, I'd rather get that piece out of the way. And then move forward, because that's one of the biggest items that we have in the whole MOU update. And if everyone's okay with that, I just want to, that's how my thought process was.
Excellent. So, yeah, so we'll reflect that. And then in terms of the next committee meeting, we'll solicit topics for board education. And then I think in terms of work modules for the committee, one of the other potential areas is to start the conversation around the advisory council's role as it enters into the MOU. But again, if we go to the next slide, Aaron, we've built in, Len, for your awareness benefit here too, is baked in quite a bit of runway for that, because I know that that's kind of in early conversations as well. And so just a quick preview, and I know that we're very much up on time, so I'm going to stop there, Tom, and pass it back to you.
Yes, I mean, I think, the work plan that you have is, fine. Like I said, I think on the RTA roles, we're going to shorten that up. And then we're just going to keep moving as the way that staff's laid this out. Let's see, member items, number 8. Anybody have any member items that they'd like to bring up? Okay, next meeting would be February 27th, correct? And that's, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, on the agenda, it has the 27th. So the next meeting's February 21st. Is that right, David?
That is, I'm just going to double check, but that is correct. Wednesday, 21st, 1:30 to 3 p.m. The subsequent one after that is going to be March 6th, 1:30 to 3 p.m. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. If there's no other issues, let me get a motion to adjourn. And I want to thank everyone. Great discussion today. Do I get a I'm sorry, Len. Go ahead.
Jen's making the motion, and I'm going to second.
All right, Jen.
Yes.
And Len.
It's the Jen and Len show.
All in favor?
Yes.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.